You're listening to the Move IQ podcast, and I'm your host, Phil Spencer, and I'm delighted to be joined again in Season 2 by my friend and co-host, Chris Ducker. This is the place where I'll be sharing my advice, my experience, and lots of tips and tricks on all things property and moving home generally. In this season, we're going to be talking about renting and giving you advice on how to navigate the rental market. So I'm really pleased to be here and I appreciate your time. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Your rented property is more than just the place you live, it's your home. Taking out Legal & General's rental protection plan could help you pay the rent on your home when you can't. Visit legalandgeneral.com/rental protection plan to find out more. So over the last 5 episodes, we've learnt about everything from how to pick the right rental property to how to be the perfect tenant. But I'm very aware it is a lot of information to take in. And of course, the rental market has been changing all the time. So as Chris alluded to at the end of Season 2, Episode 5, I'm returning on my own for this final one, just to cover the key aspects of all our previous episodes in a bit more detail. Plus, listen in for some bonus tips. I'm going to start by talking about the rental market generally because it has hugely changed in the fairly short term. Many more people are now renting and it's become an extremely competitive marketplace. Why is that? Well, it's down to a number of things. Stamp duty has to have a role to play, but also the different lending criteria that's been tightened up by the banks. But I think particularly there's been changes in attitudes among society towards renting, and that in itself has resulted in big increases in numbers of tenants. To look at some facts and figures, just under 3 million people were renting privately in 2007. 10 years later, in 2017, that number was up to 4.5 million. Interestingly, it's not just the younger generation that you might assume that it was. Actually, people over 40 are now twice as likely to rent. So there really have been some quite significant structural changes within the rental market. Okay, before you start viewing, the importance of the tenant passport and actually getting one of those before going out looking at properties is a new thing, and it's here to stay. In doing so, you can avoid reference fees, you can speed up the process, and you can look better to landlords. And you've got to remember, folks, that this is now a competitive market. So the better you look and the better you come across, the greater the chances are of you winning and securing the right property at the right rent. Tenant passports can very easily be applied for online. If you have a pet, you could also look at getting a pet passport. They can certainly persuade landlords to change their standard leases to allow pets. So yes, very worthwhile being aware of the benefits of having passports. I wanted to talk a bit about the viewing process as well, because that is just as important when renting as it is when you're buying. I mean, perhaps it's less of a long-term decision, but it's still your home, and therefore assessing the quality of the property, including things like checking for damp and how modern the appliances are, and looking at the maintenance and looking at the outside, and all of that is absolutely still relevant. I do think it's very worthwhile establishing from the agent, or indeed from the owner, whether the property is a kind of standard buy-to-let, whether it's part of a portfolio, or whether it's just somebody's home that they have moved out of because they've moved abroad, or something else has happened and they're more of a kind of accidental landlord. That there are pros and cons of each, but I just think as a tenant it's worth being aware. Are you dealing with a professional landlord who's got 100 properties, or are you dealing with somebody who's got one? Once you've found what you feel is the right property, then we're talking negotiating the levels of rent. But it's absolutely possible to negotiate other things aside from just the level of rent. And terms of a lease can be discussed. Yes, you want to talk about the levels of rent and how they're justifying the price that they're asking, and see what you make of that, whether it's fair or not, given market conditions and size and condition of the property, etc., etc. But you could also perhaps, if they're looking for more rent than you're maybe willing to pay, then could it be decorated? Might you want to the bathroom retiled? Might you want one of the bedrooms painted? Might you want a bit of extra furniture to try and justify this extra price? Or indeed, might you not like some of the furniture and actually want some of it removed and placed in storage? So that there are lots of other things that you can end up discussing, and you shouldn't be afraid to do that. When it comes to the actual move-in day, there are some important things that you need to be mindful of. Hopefully you won't be signing the lease there and then on the day, because that is a pressured situation. You want to have some time beforehand to study the lease, think about it, go through any terms that you're not clear about. On the day, you need to go through the inventory with a very fine-toothed comb, and I really do mean that. It's the inventory that will get you in trouble at the end when you move out if you want your deposit back. So if you don't pay attention to the inventory when you move in, then you're going to bear the penalty later down the track. I think it's worthwhile taking pictures and possibly videos as you move in to demonstrate the quality of accommodation, or indeed the lack of quality. If there are marks and scuffs and damage and cracked windows, or rickety steps or something like that, you've got to get that documented on the way, and it's really important. And so many people don't pay attention or enough attention to that. There's another area that I feel that perhaps people aren't paying enough attention to, and that is taking out some form of insurance in the form of a rental protection plan. It's a great way to protect yourself should something unexpected happen during the length of your lease. Our season's sponsor, Legal & General, have a policy that does just that. So if for some unforeseen reason you do fall into rent arrears during the length of your lease, not only does it cause you problems there and then, obviously, it will certainly also affect your chances of getting a new tenancy agreement or even a mortgage. If you want to find out more, then it is fully available at legalandgeneral.com/rental protection plan. A couple of other things just to highlight that came up in discussions on previous episodes. Students and single people, and people on low incomes can sometimes qualify for a discount on their council tax. Not a lot of people know that. Often it is just a one band down reduction, but if you're in that camp, it's well worth exploring. We did a bit of an in-depth analysis on tenants' rights when living in the property. And as a tenant, you've got to understand what rights you have, what responsibilities you have, as well as what responsibilities the landlord have. It's supposed to be fair. The rules are designed to be fair and equitable to both sides. But again, it's up to you to understand what they are. Do listen to the podcast there, because we really do go into detail about rights and responsibilities. Having a good relationship with your landlord can be absolutely crucial. And I promise you, it's well worth working on that relationship. Also, worthwhile having a good relationship with your landlord when it comes to leaving the property. At the end of your tenancy, obviously, they will be holding your deposit. Well, they won't actually be holding it themselves. It will be in a protection scheme. But you don't want any arguments. You don't want any difficulties at that point. You just want your deposit back. We talked a lot in the earlier episode about how best to do that, how best to use the inventory, how best to provide evidence of what you've done, provide evidence that you've cleaned the property. You might use the video that you took when you moved in as evidence of all of that. It's a really crucial moment in order to get your deposit back in a nice, simple, clear, fast, straightforward manner. There are ways and means of settling disputes. The key thing is actually providing evidence from when you moved in and what you've done at the end. You need to do it unemotionally, you need to do it professionally, and there is help available should you need it. But if you follow all our advice in the podcast, you shouldn't need it. We've got some free downloadable guides to support you on your rental journey, so do sign up at moveiq.co.uk to get yours today. Thank you for listening to the Move IQ Property Podcast. I hope you got lots out of it. I hope you've enjoyed it. We've certainly enjoyed recording it. Please do subscribe via your favourite podcast app, and I'd be massively grateful if you left us a review. Thanks, everybody. All the best. That wraps up this episode of Move IQ's Property Podcast. Whatever podcast app you like to use, please do go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I'd also really appreciate it if you could leave us a review. Reviews massively help other people like you to find us. For free supporting materials, head over to our website, moveiq.co.uk. And thanks again for tuning in.